Picture this scenario. You're 35 years old, scrolling through social media on your lunch break, and you see a post from your college roommate showing off their new Tesla. Another friend just bought a beach house. Your cousin is posting vacation photos from Italy for the third time this year, and there you are eating a turkey sandwich at your desk, wondering how everyone else seems to have figured out this whole money thing while you're still trying to decide if you can afford the name brand pasta at the grocery store. But here's something that might shock you. Most of those people posting their highlight reels are actually in worse financial shape than you are. They're just better at hiding it. And more importantly, they're all falling into the same invisible trap that's going to leave them working until they're 80 years old, whether they want to or not. My name is Keith, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, retirement planning, and why some people seem to effortlessly build wealth while others work their entire lives and still can't afford to stop. If you've ever looked at your bank account and wondered how you're supposed to magically turn your current savings into enough money to last 30 years without a paycheck, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you understand what's really happening with retirement in America. Now, before we dive into this retirement gap that's swallowing millions of people, let me ask you a question. When you think about retirement, what number pops into your head? Maybe you've heard you need $1 million. Or perhaps someone told you that you need 10 times your annual salary saved by the time you retire. These are nice round numbers that sound official and important. But here's the problem. Most people hear these numbers, feel completely overwhelmed, and then do basically nothing because it feels impossible. They figure they'll worry about it later when they're making more money or when they have fewer expenses. The truth is, there's a massive gap between what people think they need for retirement and what they're actually going to need. And this gap isn't caused by people being bad at math or not understanding compound interest. It's caused by a fundamental misunderstanding of what retirement actually costs and how long it actually lasts. Let's start with something that financial advisors don't always emphasize when they're showing you those pretty charts about retirement planning. The average retirement in America now lasts about 20 years. 20 years. That's not a brief victory lap after a long career. That's 2 decades of living without a paycheck, during which your expenses don't magically disappear. In fact, many retirees discover that their expenses actually increase in the first decade of retirement, because suddenly they have time to do all the things they couldn't do while they were working. They travel, they take up expensive hobbies, they eat out more often because cooking for 2 people gets tedious when you're both home all day. But here's where the math gets really terrifying. If you're going to need your money to last 20 years in retirement, and you want to maintain anything close to your current standard of living, you need to save enough money to replace your current income for 2 decades. Think about that for a second. Whatever you're earning right now, imagine trying to save up 20 years worth of that income. If you make $60,000 per year, you'd need $1.2 million just to cover the basics, assuming you never get a raise and inflation doesn't exist. But of course, inflation does exist, and it's particularly brutal for retirees, because they can't just ask their investment portfolio for a cost of living adjustment. Here's something that will probably make you uncomfortable. The median retirement savings for Americans between 55 and 64, the people who are closest to retirement, is about $65,000 to fund 20 years of not working. That's enough money to replace a $60,000 salary for about 13 months, not 20 years, 13 months. Even if we're optimistic and assume that Social Security will make up some of the difference, we're still talking about a shortfall that's measured in hundreds of thousands of dollars for most people. But here's where things get even more depressing. Those numbers I just shared represent the median, which means half of Americans in that age group have saved even less than $65,000. About 40% of Americans approaching retirement age have saved absolutely nothing in retirement accounts. $0. They're planning to fund 2 decades of retirement entirely with Social Security benefits that average about $1,500 per month. Try living on $1,500 per month in today's economy and see how that works out for you. Now, you might be thinking that this is just a problem for people who didn't plan ahead or who made poor financial decisions throughout their careers. But here's what's really scary about this retirement gap. It's not just affecting people who are irresponsible with money. It's affecting teachers, nurses, engineers, and accountants. People with college degrees and steady careers who did everything they were supposed to do. They showed up to work every day. They contributed to their 401k when their employer offered one, and they assumed that would be enough. The problem is that the entire retirement system in America has shifted dramatically over the past 40 years, and most people haven't adjusted their expectations or their savings rates to match the new reality. Let's talk about what happened here, because understanding this shift explains why so many people are falling into this gap without realizing it. Your grandparents probably retired with something called a pension, which guaranteed them a specific monthly income for the rest of their lives. They didn't need to worry about market crashes or inflation or running out of money because their employer promised to take care of them. The company took all the investment risk and all the longevity risk. Your grandparents just had to show up to work for 30 or 40 years and trust that the money would be there when they retired. But here's what changed. Starting in the 1980s, companies began replacing pensions with 401k plans. On the surface, this seemed like a great deal for employees. Instead of being stuck with whatever pension their employer offered, workers could control their own retirement savings, choose their own investments, and potentially build more wealth if they made smart decisions. The problem is that this shift transferred all of the risk from the company to the individual. Suddenly, regular people who had never thought about investment strategy or market volatility were responsible for building and managing portfolios that needed to last decades. Even worse, the math behind 401k contributions was based on assumptions that don't reflect reality for most people. The standard advice was to contribute enough to get your employer match, maybe 3% of your salary, and let compound interest do the heavy lifting over 30 or 40 years. This advice worked great on paper, assuming consistent contributions, steady market returns, and no major financial emergencies that would force people to stop contributing or raid their retirement accounts. But real life doesn't work that way. The average person changes jobs 12 times during their career. Each job change creates an opportunity for retirement savings to get derailed. Maybe the new employer doesn't offer a 401k plan right away. Maybe the investment options are terrible. Maybe the person cashes out their old 401k to cover moving expenses or a gap in employment. Studies show that about 40% of people cash out their 401k when they change jobs, destroying years of compound growth in exchange for immediate cash that gets eaten up by taxes and penalties. Then there are the life events that financial planners don't account for when they're showing you those smooth upward curves on retirement projections. People get divorced and have to split their retirement savings. They have kids and childcare costs force them to reduce their 401k contributions. They buy houses and use up all their available savings for down payments. They face medical emergencies that wipe out years of careful saving. They support aging parents or help adult children through financial crises. These aren't rare exceptions. These are normal life events that happen to most families. But here's the part that really gets me. Even people who manage to avoid all of these pitfalls and consistently contribute to their retirement accounts often discover that they're still falling short because they're saving for the wrong number. Financial advisors love to talk about the 4% rule, which suggests that you can safely withdraw 4% of your retirement savings each year without running out of money. This rule implies that if you want $40,000 per year in retirement income, you need $1 million saved. Sounds reasonable, right? The problem is that the 4% rule was developed in the 1990s based on historical market returns and assumptions about inflation that don't necessarily apply to today's economic reality. With interest rates near historic lows and stock market valuations near historic highs, many financial experts believe the safe withdrawal rate might be closer to 3% or even 2.5%. If the safe withdrawal rate is 3%, then you need $1.33 million to generate that same $40,000 annual income. If it's 2.5%, you need $1.6 million. Suddenly, that already difficult savings goal has become 60% more challenging. And we haven't even talked about healthcare costs yet, which represent probably the biggest wild card in retirement planning. The average 65-year-old couple will spend about $300,000 on healthcare during retirement. That's after Medicare coverage. We're talking about premiums, deductibles, prescription drugs, dental care, vision care, and long-term care expenses that Medicare doesn't cover. If you haven't specifically planned for healthcare costs, they alone can destroy even a well-funded retirement plan. Here's something that might blow your mind. Long-term care, which about 70% of people will need at some point, can cost $100,000 per year or more. A nursing home stay averages about $108,000 annually. If you need skilled nursing care for just 3 years, you're looking at over $300,000 in expenses that will come directly out of your retirement savings. Medicaid will eventually cover long-term care costs, but only after you've spent down almost all of your assets. So you could work your entire life, save diligently, build a comfortable nest egg, and then watch it disappear in a few years because you need care that Medicare doesn't cover. But let's get back to why people are falling into this retirement gap without realizing it. The biggest reason is that retirement feels abstract and distant when you're young, and by the time it starts feeling real, you've already missed most of the years when compound interest could have done the heavy lifting for you. If you start saving $500 per month at age 25 and earn 8% annually, you'll have about $1.4 million by age 65. If you wait until age 35 to start that same $500 monthly savings plan, you'll have about $680,000 by age 65. Waiting 10 years to start saving costs you over $700,000 in retirement wealth, even though you're making the exact same monthly contributions. This is why the retirement gap is so insidious. It's not created by one big mistake that people can easily identify and correct. It's created by thousands of small decisions and non-decisions that compound over decades. Every month that someone doesn't start saving for retirement, every job change where they cash out their 401k, every financial emergency where they raid their retirement account, every year they contribute the minimum instead of maximizing their savings, they're falling deeper into a gap that becomes harder and harder to climb out of as they get older. Here's what makes this particularly cruel. The people who are falling into this retirement gap aren't lazy or financially irresponsible. Many of them are working harder than ever, often juggling multiple jobs or side hustles to make ends meet. They're paying off student loans, supporting children, caring for aging parents, and dealing with housing costs that consume an ever-increasing percentage of their income. Retirement savings feels like a luxury they can't afford, so they keep putting it off until they have more financial breathing room. But for many people, that breathing room never comes. The cruel irony is that the people who most need to be saving aggressively for retirement are often the least able to do so. If you're earning $35,000 per year and struggling to cover basic living expenses, setting aside $300 per month for retirement feels impossible. But if you don't start saving something, even a small amount, the gap between what you'll need and what you'll have becomes unbridgeable. Meanwhile, people earning $150,000 per year can more easily afford to maximize their retirement contributions, but they often don't feel the same urgency because they assume they have more time to catch up. Let's talk about what this retirement gap actually looks like for real people in real situations, because the numbers are one thing, but the human impact is what's truly heartbreaking. I know someone who worked as a teacher for 35 years, contributed to the state pension system, and thought she was set for retirement. Then the state changed the pension rules, reduced benefits for future retirees, and she discovered that her monthly pension would be about $8,000. Combined with Social Security, she'll have about $3,200 per month to live on. That might sound reasonable until you consider that her mortgage payment is $1,400 per month, her health insurance costs $600 per month, and she still has $30,000 in student loans that won't be forgiven just because she retired. After basic expenses, she has about $400 per month for food, utilities, transportation, and everything else. She's 67 years old and looking for part-time work because retirement isn't financially viable. Or consider the couple I met who both worked in corporate jobs, earned decent salaries, and contributed to their 401k plans for 25 years. They accumulated about $350,000 in retirement savings, which felt like a substantial amount until they tried to figure out how to turn it into monthly income. Using the 4% rule, their savings would generate about $14,000 per year, or roughly $1,200 per month. Combined with Social Security, they might have $4,000 per month to live on. The problem is they were earning $120,000 per year before retirement, and their lifestyle was built around that income level. Their mortgage payment alone is $2,200 per month. They're discovering that retirement means not just stopping work, but dramatically reducing their standard of living. These aren't extreme cases or cautionary tales about people who made obviously bad financial decisions. These are typical American retirees who followed conventional wisdom, worked steady jobs, and saved what they thought was a reasonable amount. They're falling into the retirement gap not because they were reckless, but because the retirement system in America is fundamentally broken for anyone who isn't wealthy enough to save massive amounts of money. Here's something that financial advisors don't always emphasize when they're selling retirement planning services. The people who successfully retire comfortably in America typically fall into one of three categories. First, there are people who inherited wealth or had family financial support that allowed them to save aggressively throughout their careers. Second, there are high earners who could afford to maximize their 401k contributions and still maintain their lifestyle. Third, there are people who lived extremely frugally throughout their working years, saving 20% or more of their income and accepting a lower standard of living in order to fund their retirement. Notice what's missing from that list. There's no category for people who worked normal jobs, earned normal salaries, and saved normal amounts. The retirement system doesn't work for normal people, which explains why the majority of Americans are heading toward a retirement crisis that will make the current situation look optimistic by comparison. But here's where the story gets even more depressing. The retirement gap isn't just affecting people who are currently retired or approaching retirement. It's getting worse for younger generations. Millennials and Gen Z face even greater challenges in building retirement wealth than previous generations. They're dealing with higher education costs, lower relative wages, higher housing costs, and less job security than their parents had. Many young people are so focused on paying off student loans and saving for down payments that retirement planning gets pushed to the bottom of their priority list. Even worse, younger generations are likely to receive lower Social Security benefits than current retirees. The Social Security Trust Fund is projected to be depleted by 2034, which would trigger automatic benefit cuts of about 25% unless Congress takes action. So young people can't count on Social Security to make up the difference in their retirement savings the way current retirees can. They need to save even more money to achieve the same retirement security that previous generations enjoyed. The math is brutal. A 25-year-old who wants to maintain their current standard of living in retirement probably needs to save 15 to 20% of their income every year for not 3% or 6%, not sometimes when they can afford it. Every single year without exception for 4 decades. This assumes no major financial setbacks, no periods of unemployment, no family emergencies that require them to reduce their savings rate. It assumes they can afford to live on 80% of their income while saving 20% for a future that might be 4 decades away. Most people can't do this, which means most people are going to fall into the retirement gap. They're going to work until they physically can't work anymore. Then they're going to live on Social Security benefits that won't cover their expenses, and they're going to spend their golden years worrying about money instead of enjoying the retirement they worked their entire lives to achieve. But here's the thing that might give you some hope, even in the face of all this depressing math. Understanding the problem is the first step toward solving it. Most people who are falling into the retirement gap don't even realize it's happening until it's too late. They assume that things will work out somehow, or that they'll figure it out later when they're closer to retirement age. By that point, compound interest can't save them because they don't have enough time left for their money to grow. If you're reading this and you're under 40, you still have time to avoid the worst effects of the retirement gap, but it's going to require a level of financial discipline that most people aren't prepared for. You're going to need to save more aggressively than your parents did, start earlier than they did, and make retirement planning a higher priority than they did. You're going to need to treat retirement savings like a monthly bill that must be paid, not like a nice-to-have goal that you'll get around to when you have extra money. Here's something that most financial advisors won't tell you because it's bad for business. If you're over 45 and you haven't been saving aggressively for retirement, you're probably not going to be able to save your way out of the retirement gap through normal means. The math just doesn't work. You'd need to save such a large percentage of your income that it would be impossible to maintain your current lifestyle. This doesn't mean you should give up, but it does mean you need to start thinking creatively about solutions that go beyond traditional retirement planning advice. Maybe that means working longer than you planned, perhaps until age 70 or beyond. Maybe it means downsizing your lifestyle before you retire so you need less income to maintain it. Maybe it means moving to a lower-cost area or considering retirement abroad where your dollars stretch further. Maybe it means starting a side business that can provide income throughout retirement or investing in skills that will allow you to work part-time in retirement instead of stopping work completely. The point is, if you're falling into the retirement gap, pretending it doesn't exist won't make it go away. The sooner you acknowledge the reality of your situation, the more options you'll have to address it. Waiting until you're 65 to figure out that your retirement savings won't last 20 years doesn't give you many alternatives except working longer or accepting a much lower standard of living. So, there you have it. The retirement gap that nobody realizes they're falling into isn't caused by any single factor or mistake. It's the result of a retirement system that shifted risk from employers to individuals without giving people the tools, knowledge, or resources they need to manage that risk successfully. It's compounded by economic realities that make saving difficult for most people. and by human psychology that makes it hard to prioritize distant goals over immediate needs. The gap is real, it's growing, and it's going to affect millions of people who worked their entire lives under the assumption that things would work out somehow. The only question is whether you're going to be one of them or whether you're going to start making the hard choices necessary to avoid falling in.